Richard is here.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's Scrutiny Children's Services Review Group. I'll just run through the usual housekeeping notices. So the meeting this evening will be live streamed to the public. A recording of the public part of the meeting will be available on the council website within 24 hours of the meeting. Will remote participants joining the meeting using Teams, please turn your cameras on and use the hands up icon to indicate a question or comment. Turn microphones on to speak and off when finished. In-person attendees, please remember to switch microphones on when speaking and speak directly into the microphone and turn off when finished. With attendees, please also switch off mobile phones or put them on silent mode. And if you need to take a call, please leave the room. So moving swiftly on to the agenda. So first item is apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Anne Donilon. Any others?
No, Chair, that's it.
Sorry, I'll repeat that because I didn't have my microphone on. The next item of the agenda is to review the minutes of the last meeting dated 25th of October 2022. Any comments on those minutes? No comments, so I can sign those off as approved. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 3, which is disclosures of interest. I think members tend to disclose when they are a governor of school, so I'll declare that I'm a governor of Summaries Junior School. Councillor Keynes.
Governor of Queen Elizabeth and governor of the virtual school.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Malcolm.
I'm on the management committee of the pupil referral unit, which is like being a governor.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on to item 4, which is urgent.
Chair, sorry.
Oh, my apologies. Yeah. Go ahead.
My usual
Dr.
declaration. So I'm governor at the Meads Primary, Grasmere Nursery School, and also governor at University of Bedfordshire. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. So moving on to item 4, urgent business. Nothing reported to me.
None, Chair, none that I'm aware of.
Right, thank you. Item 5, references from committees and other bodies.
None, Chair.
Thank you. And under item 6, Chair's update, I don't have any updates to report. So we'll move on to item 7, which is the Education Standards Report, which is on pages 15 to 31 of your agenda packs. And the officer is Caroline Dawes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Everybody, welcome. This is our annual report, I guess, to this group on the performance of children in Luton in the last academic year. So these are children at age 5, so reception, that's the early years data. Age 6, so when they're in year 1, have a phonics check. Yeah, age 7 in year 2, key stage 1, these poor little things getting tested so much. When they're age 11 in year 6, which is key stage 2, and finally at 16, which is key stage 4 in year 11. So I think it's important to note that you can't really compare, or we can't compare the data this year to previous years because obviously COVID was in the middle. And in fact, these were the first statutory assessments since before the pandemic, so since 2019. So I think it's important to consider the background. In particular, you know, I came to this group and talked about the impact of COVID on our children, particularly disadvantaged children, and particularly the young children. Schools made huge efforts to support remote learning when schools were closed or when bubbles were closed, when there was COVID inside schools. but they also stayed open for vulnerable children and for children of key workers. So there was a hugely disruptive time. If you think in terms of how it's really impacted on children, if you think about the ages of children, currently children from 2022 who are in early years, year 1 and year 2, they've not experienced a normal school year yet. All right, and that's some of the background behind the data. Similarly, the last time that year 6 pupils had a normal year was when they were in year 3, when they were 8 years old. And similarly, year 11, the last time they had a normal school year was when they were in year 8, age 13. So that's the context behind this data. For GCSE students, last year and the year before, so 2021 and 2020, they received their GCSE results. They got their qualifications, but it was all teacher assessment, so we can't compare those. There's a national methodology that was overlaid the GCSE outcomes, which meant that the outcomes would be lower than 2021, but above 2019. So that's impacted on all schools' outcomes. So if we think about the areas of strength, the areas that schools and children did really well in, I think it's to be noted that schools did really well despite the challenges posed by COVID, and bucking against the national trend that at Key Stage 2, so the end of primary, the outcomes in reading, writing and maths continue to improve. And that's against a backdrop of decrease in outcomes nationally. So Luton this year is above national at Key Stage 2 in reading, writing and maths. And I'm really pleased to be able to come here and report that, because previously, we've reported that Key Stage 2 was that real struggle. Results are particularly strong in reading and maths. So that's great for future work. I think this reflects the success and the sustainability of the approach that we've taken to school improvement, which we've reported here around spotlight on standards. But also I think the work that schools, the education service, the DFE, the charitable sector, all working together did to ensure that students had access to devices in order and connectivity to support that remote learning. And that was really important, particularly for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. So we're pleased to say that in terms of ranking, we know it's not a competition, but when we're doing well, it certainly is. We're now in the 36th percentile nationally when it comes to reading, writing and maths. And just for context, we were 93rd in 2018. So that's really pleasing. Similarly, children who are on free school meals, so children who are classed as disadvantaged children in Luton continue to do better than their peers nationally, than disadvantaged children nationally at every key stage. And that was still the case in 2022 following the pandemic. Particularly strong at Key Stage 2 in maths, where our disadvantaged children perform 11 percentage points higher than disadvantaged children nationally. At Key Stage 4, so at GCSE, a higher proportion of our disadvantaged students in Year 11 get their maths and English, which then gives them access to higher education. Children with SEND, so children with special educational needs and disabilities, again reached the expected levels in phonics, and that proportion is continuing to increase, and in fact was above the similar children nationally this year. So you can see the kind of data that's coming. The outcomes in Key Stage 2 are strong and are reflected for children with SEND as well. Key Stage 4, which you could say is one of the most important, it's probably the most important outcome in terms of life chances and access to further education. Our disadvantaged children do better than disadvantaged children nationally, and they make better progress across 8 subjects than students nationally, so that's all students. So the attainment in terms of all students at grades 4 and grade 5 in maths and English is still persistently below national, but the gap with national is reducing. Our strategy to improve outcomes at Key Stage 4 is to improve outcomes at Key Stage 2. So we'll hopefully see that gap continue to narrow. So of course, it's not all great news. The impact on early years, phonics and Key Stage 1, so these are the youngest children, they were most severely impacted by COVID and disproportionately compared to the rest of the country. So our measures at all of those key stages are significantly below national, right in that sort of bottom fifth percentile, if you like. Writing at Key Stage 2 was not as strong as reading and maths. That seemed to have been impacted more significantly by COVID and by lockdown. And I think that recognises the experiences that children need to have in order to be able to write. And we'll come on to what we're going to do about this later in the report. Children with SEND, similarly, although disadvantaged children do better than disadvantaged children nationally, generally speaking, children with SEND and those who aren't disadvantaged generally are still performing below national. And so we're really looking to try to push those outcomes up. Similarly, at Key Stage 4, we mentioned that the gap with national is narrowing, but it still performs around 5 percentage points below national for maths and English at grade 4 and above. But it is narrowing. So the gap in 2018 was 8 percentage points. So we're narrowing that gap. In terms of risks from the education sector that's been reported to us for 2023, obviously we're fingers crossed hoping that we have more of a normal year this year in terms of COVID not impacting too much. But we are seeing, as a consequence of COVID, increased numbers of children coming into reception with needs which are that teachers haven't really seen before. I don't really want to class them as a special educational need, but it's an additional need, whether it's to do with the social development that hasn't been as you would expect prior to COVID, whether it's physical development, social development, emotional development. We're really seeing children arriving in reception aged 4 and 5 with quite exceptional needs. Schools are struggling to recruit teaching assistants, particularly teaching assistants to help with and support children with quite complex special needs and some quite challenging behaviour. So what we're seeing is obviously schools making choices around prioritising, and so bringing teaching assistants from Key Stage 2 down into early years and Key Stage 1. So that support is perhaps not going to be so much at Key Stage 2 as we've previously had. So there's that's the response to that required focus at early years and Key Stage 1, but it may well impact on the momentum of improvement at Key Stage 2. We hope not, but that's a risk. So what are we doing about it with our schools? In paragraphs 27 to 32, it describes the kind of focus that we've got in our school improvement. We've partnered with some organisations to support our priorities. In particular, around writing, we're really focusing on oracy and improving children's language right across the board, rather than trying to improve writing by doing more writing. We've seen that just doesn't work. So we're improving writing through focusing on language acquisition, fluency, and vocabulary development. We've partnered with a group, with an organisation called Challenging Education, which is running a programme called RADI, which is Raising Achievement of Disadvantaged Youngsters. And although you may think, well, why are we bothering with that? Because we're above national. Well, actually, this is around disadvantaged children who aren't performing at the top levels that we think they should be. So we're working with targeted schools whose outcomes superficially look fine, but actually there's too much of a gap between their disadvantaged and non-disadvantaged, particularly at those higher levels of achievement. We've got a strategic partnership with the Enigma Maths Hub, focusing on teaching maths through mastery. Many schools are engaged with that. We've got a conference on the 26th of January. Colleagues are very welcome to come to that. It's about sharing best practice around increasing outcomes for disadvantaged children. And so we're hoping to have quite a good reach around that sharing practice beyond Luton's boundaries, but also within Luton schools. We've got a strategic approach to improving outcomes for children with SEND by really concentrating on all schools, and that schools, it's not about a separate aspect of schools. Schools aren't good if they're not good for children with special educational needs. So we're working with the National Association for Special Educational Needs on a programme called Whole School SEND, which is really driving home that message. And our consultancy and training, so the small group of people that we've still got either in the team or as associate consultants, are really focusing on early years and Key Stage 1 to support schools in helping children catch up and not labelling them, if you like, too early around having a learning difficulty, but really supporting them in the needs that they're presenting with. So I've attached the appendix, which has got all of the numbers on it, the percentages, but it's really open to anyone for any questions on the Education Standards 2022.
Thank you for your report. Any questions, Councillor Moles?
Thank you, Karen, and that was very interesting. I want to give it to you. It was great. And I'm sorry, I have got a criticism. Could we have the numbers of children? Because when you present percentages, it could be 2 out of 10. It would be nice if in each sort of year it had disadvantaged children's numbers and the rest.
Sure. Sorry, sure. So thank you for that and apologies. For the minutes, the cohort sizes. So for Key Stage 4, the total number of children in year 11 was 2,860. So the percentages will be a percentage of that. So 2,860 in Key Stage 4. Key Stage 2, 3,350 in Key Stage 2, so at year 6. Similar number at Key Stage 1, 3,230, and there'll be a similar number at early years.
Thank you.
Thanks. So we have Councillor Wahid next, and then Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your report, Caroline. Really welcome the Key Stage 2 indicators, which are, really above national. And I just wanted to know about on page 16, the SEND children. It says about the phonics, the educational health plans they have. So what is this, a reception or age 4 to 5? What key stage is this? At the bottom of page 16, paragraph 14.
Sure. So phonics is year 1. So this is age 6. These are 6-year-olds, and phonics is the approach to teaching early reading. So it's absolutely crucial. So we're really pleased about that, but that's year 1, age 6.
It's taking place in January. So it's taking place in Luton. Yeah.
It's in Luton at the Lee Grave Centre.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Councillor Malcolm.
Thank you. So 2 things. One on the conference, Durham University have an evidence into education team, and they're doing a conference on the 28th on the same topic. I don't know if you're aware of that already, but it might be worth looking at who they've got speaking. If you like, there would be some really top quality content at that. So if you just search for the Durham University evidence into education, I think it is, Evidence Centre for Education. They've got a conference, very soon. And even just looking at who's speaking at that, it might be possible to pick off a few keynote speakers potentially for our conference, if that'd be useful. And then the question I had was, in terms of pupils who aren't disadvantaged, around disadvantage, I suppose, in general as well, because the evidence suggests that if a pupil's disadvantaged for 9 years of their schooling, they do much, much worse than if they're disadvantaged for 1 year of their schooling. The graph kind of goes like that in terms of overall outcomes at GCSE level. And then actually pupils who aren't disadvantaged, like our outcomes there are quite significantly worse than national. And I guess Do we know why that is? Because if we know why that is, then it might be possible to do more about it. Is it because those pupils go outside of Luton for their education, like families who aren't disadvantaged? Is it that it's an impact of like the context that you're in? Is it, I thought of another reason, that they are disadvantaged, but it's not picked up because it's such a low bar for free school meals. Like, do we have a feel for that, and actually what therefore the best measures are to improve those experiences as well?
Thank you. That's a really complex question, as reflected in the many parts of it. If you want to fund me for a PhD, I'd love to do that, but that's the sort of level that we're talking about. The children that we're reporting on are children in Luton schools. Okay, so it doesn't include children who go outside of Luton. We don't have their data. Similarly, therefore, we've got some children who come into Luton who don't live in Luton that are included in that. So it's about school performance. But it is very stubborn, that underperformance of children who are not classed as disadvantaged. We would say that actually there are a significant proportion of pupils who aren't eligible for free school meals but are actually disadvantaged. And so schools are very aware of that. So you might say, well, actually, our disadvantaged cohort should be larger than it actually is just by free school meals. Similarly, there's questions around around expectations, and we push back to schools all of the time around having really high expectations on all of our children, and looking at those children who could achieve really, really highly and not being satisfied by them meeting those thresholds of level 4 above or level 5 or above. So we're really focusing on schools and pushing the higher attaining, increasing the proportion of children getting level 7 and above, those higher grades, which all contributes to those performance measures, but also increases those life chances for those young people. Scraping a grade 5 doesn't translate easily into high grades at A level and access to the best universities. And it's really around talking to schools or articulating to schools, having high expectations of those different pathways and having high expectations around destinations. Maybe we've become victims of our own success, really focusing on disadvantage and using disadvantage as the lens to look through. And the gap is quite significant. I mean, the gap is shocking nationally, around 28 percentage points for disadvantage. So we push back to schools as well. We don't get medals for having a narrow gap when the gap nationally is so stark. But I think those non-disadvantaged paradoxically may well become a more of a focus group, particularly at Key Stage 4. But you're right, it's a very complex picture. The other aspect that we're looking at the moment is around ethnicity, and that data is coming out. So the intersection between poverty and ethnicity, I think, is something which is particularly complex, which we're unpacking at the moment.
I guess I just wonder would it be possible to contextualise this report and the outcomes for our non-disadvantaged pupils by saying, here's kind of the profile of our non-disadvantaged pupils compared to the national profile of non-disadvantaged pupils? Because I suspect most of it is our non-disadvantaged pupils are really quite disadvantaged compared to the national average. And actually, if you just put that in as a bit of context to whenever we're talking about this kind of data, it probably frame it really well, actually, and probably explain a lot of what's going on there.
Yeah, thank you.
There are some other things, and that's like the stuff you've talked around, like that you would always want to be aware of, we would always want to be aware of, but I wonder whether just kind of a national context of our non-disadvantaged pupils might really help me frame their data.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We can do that.
Councillor Petts.
Yeah, thank you for the report, Caroline. My question is about the asylum seekers' children. Are we reporting on that separately? And how are they fitting in with the rest of the achievements?
So I guess we're not currently reporting on them separately. We're doing the analysis by ethnicity currently, so we can put an extra layer in that may well come out of it. Anecdotal report is that actually our children who are asylum seekers or recently arrived in the country do really well and add to our performance from a sort of school performance perspective. Quite a lot of children who arrived and got educated in Luton then moved on and moved to elsewhere. So there's quite a lot of churn in that system, but we can certainly look at that as part of our next level of analysis. I guess particularly around schools like Surrey Street Primary School, who had around 40 Afghan refugees. Not all of them, of course, would be in year 6, but some would be in early years, Key Stage 1 and so on. So we can certainly look at that, yes.
The children that come in with good levels of English, are they sort of achieving the same sort of results as local children?
So the level of English language is a key factor in terms of children's achievement. We're really fortunate in that a high proportion of our pupils speak more than one language, and that really helps them in their learning. So when we've done analysis by English levels of acquisition, so fluency, children in year 6 who are approaching fluency, so nearly fluent and fluent, but have got English as an additional language, they outperform children who don't speak any other languages. What we're finding is in early years and Key Stage 1 with the younger children that there's a high level of language poverty with with many children who don't speak English as an additional language. So they might be native English speakers, but they still have low levels of language. So that's our focus on oracy, on vocabulary building, on experiences and speaking for all children, so that their vocabulary bank is increased, so that their fluency is increased. And it's not really a matter of EAL, or English as additional language, versus English as their primary language. So we find, generally speaking, the more languages you speak, the better you do.
Thank you, Caroline.
Any other questions, comments? Councillor Keynes?
I suppose I'd better say something. The thing that keeps jumping out at me in this report is below national average. And you have said already it's because of the pandemic, but every other town had the same problem. Why are we still below the national average?
Yeah, I'd definitely say that we're not below national average because of the pandemic for exactly that reason. It affected everybody. All sorts of complicated reasons. We have less influence in secondary schools. It might well be that there's larger cohorts of children that are more that contribute more to that data. It's very complicated. I would say that we're on track to get to national average. I think our strategy of improving standards at Key Stage 2 is a solid strategy. So children going into secondary school, irrespective of which school they go to, are going in at a higher level and therefore more likely to be able to access that secondary curriculum. And that's where those expectations at secondary school need to be increased with the increasing achievement of children coming in year 7. There is also quite a lag in secondary school. So the children who've come in this year in year 7 above national will not do their GCSEs until sort of 2030. And so there is, or 2027, there is that lag, yeah, that 5-year lag. So that will take some time to come through, but you're seeing that gap narrowing. So the gap has halved over the last 4 years. So you would hope that we'd get to national in the next 2 or 3 years, you would hope.
My only other question is, will we get regular updates on your options or proposals?
So we do our annual update in terms of data. So the data doesn't change now. That's it for the annual release of data. So the figures won't change. I'm planning on coming to report to this group around Ofsted outcomes. So the profile of Ofsted inspections, which does change on a fairly regular basis, and also our independent schools I'll be reporting to this group on that. I've also been asked to report on the categories of schools, so the numbers of schools which are C and D and A and B. So that can be part of that report, the progress of it, the extent to which schools are engaging in those proposals. So yes, I can add that into that report.
Sorry, was that a yes or a no?
It's a yes, I can do that in our next report.
Thank you. Just a few other questions, if I may. So the data presented in this report, does the data cover academy schools as well?
Yes, that's all state-funded schools. So our maintained schools and our academies, yeah, all together.
Great, thank you. And you mentioned earlier about problems recruiting teaching assistants. Is there a plan in place to aid in recruitment of teaching assistants?
Yeah, so we're really looking for a more strategic approach to training teaching assistants. So we're working both with the Chiltern Teaching School Hub to run a programme of training teaching assistants, and also to have some career progression for teaching assistants. There's different layers of them. That's starting in February at the Chiltern Teaching School Hub. And we're also working with our colleagues in adult and community learning to use our schools as practice, as teaching practices effectively for the people that they train as teaching assistants, so that we've got this pipeline of teaching assistants and link in the training providers, Teaching School Hub and our adult and community learning, with our schools that need to employ them. And as well as having an apprenticeship programme around teaching assistants. So you can be an apprentice teaching assistant. So we've got those three strategies on track now.
Great, thank you. One last question. I understand, you may be able to correct me on this, but I understand that Ofsted are looking at, when they're looking at schools, what plans do the schools have in place to improve the bottom performing 20% of children. I was just curious as to how these proposals might target those bottom performing 20%. And there was something else. It might come back to me, but yeah, if you could ask that.
Thank you. So yes, that's talking about the children with special educational needs and the lower retaining children. So all of these proposals will include all of those children. So we're certainly not focusing on that top end as much as perhaps we would be expecting schools to, but in terms of our intervention, our added provision, it is definitely focused on those lowest 20%. Bearing in mind, of course, that the lowest 20% in one school will be different to the lowest 20% in another. But yes, absolutely. And I think the focus that we've had on high quality teaching and learning for all children has really impacted on that bottom 20% far more than having separate intervention programmes where they're withdrawn from lessons to have extra tuition. And we've really found that's worked in terms of the gap between the bottom 20% and the top hasn't increased as the overall results have gone up. So our entire strategy is really around that high quality teaching and learning, which supports all children and the disadvantaged and the lowest ability in with most impact.
Thanks very much. And I'll just remember my other question. Obviously, you mentioned you'll come back and with updated data in a year's time. In relation to these individual measures, improvement measures, how is the level of success going to be measured for each of these individual improvement measures, or will it just all be covered by the data you're presenting here?
So I can bring in data around engagement, so the number of schools that are engaging with these this improvement offer, because it's up to schools where they source their school improvement activity from. So I can certainly report on the levels of engagement if the group would be interested in that. But the impact really is on the data, on the outcomes. So whilst we try to avoid being too data driven, to avoid those perverse incentives of coaching children up for tests, we still use those test outcomes as a proxy indicator of success. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. I don't see any other hands up, none on the screen. So thank you for your report. Let me just check the. So the recommendation was just to note the contents of the report. So thanks very much. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next item of the agenda, which is item 8, Child Healthy Weight Report, which is on pages 32 to 35 of your agenda packs. And that's with a number of names here. Is it Matthew Hudson? Matthew, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got Kate here with me today who will just take us through the report. Thank you.
Yeah, so firstly, I will just provide a brief background and context into this work. This is covered in the report that's been provided to go alongside today's meeting, but I'll just touch upon it now to set the scene, as it were. So as we know, Luton does have high local rates for childhood overweight and obesity. We get a lot of our information come through of prevalence rates through the NCMP. So that's the National Child Measurement Programme that measures children in years R reception and year 6, and will calculate their BMI. We've just now had the new 2021 data come in that shows that Luton has reported higher than national rates. I'll touch upon how we're looking to use this data further down the line, but shortly, one of the ways that the NCMP data is used is so children who get identified are referred into the local tier 2 child weight management provision that's provided through Total Wellbeing. It's a programme that runs across 10 weeks that provides families with support into managing their weight in a healthy manner. And what we're seeing is that although there are high prevalence rates for childhood obesity in Luton and subsequent referrals into the Tier 2 programme, we're not necessarily seeing this translated into utilisation of the service. So with reference to this, and also looking to reinforce the local commitment to child weight management, the local Luton Obesity Task Force was established. So this group brought together a wide variety of different professionals who were linked in with this work and provided us all with a chance to come together and discuss the changing context following the pandemic, as well as to identify some new ways of working. So from that initial meeting, some focus areas were identified to better position local services to work together and prevent and hopefully reduce childhood obesity across the borough. They were identified to sit across 3 themes: communications and engagement, schools and earlier settings, as well as complex needs pathways. To support this ongoing work, action plans have been developed or in development for this for each group. As we can appreciate, to deliver that consistency approach, these focuses represent both shorter term. Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, I was just sort of trying to set. I'll speak slower. Okay, no worries. I just wanted to sort of set the scene as to why we have this task force. So it has different levels of actions that cover shorter term immediate focuses, as well as trying to lay the groundwork for longer term action, as we know and we appreciate that that's needed to address obesity across the borough. And there are 3 themes that are laid out in the report as well, to go into a bit more detail about that were identified through the group. Do you want me to carry on with that, or? Yep, okay, no worries. Yeah, as I was saying, it really was quite a great opportunity for us to come together, not people meeting after the pandemic, as well as sort of understanding what work's going on in different areas. So there was a great I suppose boon from us in regard to some of the safeguarding aspects that came out of this discussion. We had a case study that came in from a health colleague, sorry, I'll lean in, who identified a particular case, and through that work where some new contacts were made and links between the council safeguarding MASH team and our health colleagues, so the nurse team. But yeah, as I said, so going back to the NCMP data in particular, so one of the ways that we would like to sort of tap into this is through our school network as a way to leverage their support and capacity and their link in with the communities and the families. And one of the ways we've been looking to do that, as identified through the group, was to think about the best ways to provide that information to the schools and the teams. So using the NCMP data, we can recreate our school health profiles that just gives an overview to schools of what's going on in the local area and can help them to devise local actions which they have in the past completed. As to sort of looking ahead to the general aspirations of this group moving forward, we obviously want to continue with this, but we also have a pathway of services. So the different ways that our providers interact and also the referral mechanisms that are in place that get children sort of from start to finish, as it were. This is still work in progress, and it's been very much treated as a live document, but it was used as quite a good conversation piece at the initial meeting. So yeah, as to the steps we're taking, looking ahead, we would like to continue obviously to formalise this work, and we're also thinking of ways that we can continue to bring in level of accountability and oversight and reporting mechanisms. So who these actions that we've identified will be reported back to. I don't know if Matt has any additional pointers to add to that.
Great. Okay. I was just wondering who actually sits on this obesity task force. What's it made up of?
So it includes members from the ICB, as well as we have some head teachers. Actually, it was a really great, as I said, boon to us to come in, as well as from the Early Years Alliance. We've got, of course, the providers from the Tier 2 service, as well as breastfeeding, so infant young child feeding practices. So we're just trying to bring in a more of a live course approach with how we're dealing with obesity, and that is reflected as well in how we're trying to set up our pathways and the way that the groups transition from early years to schools to teenagers and adults.
Thank you. One other question is, do schools individually have to have their own obesity plan for their children, or is there like a harmonised plan that sort of we as a council ask the schools to implement? How does that work? Do you have an answer for that one?
So the individual schools will work on their own agendas to some degree. Obviously, we will provide support to them in different ways. So we have the traditional Tier 2 weight management service, which we offer across Luton through Total Wellbeing, and they will provide a tailored support package to different schools. So it's really dependent on the needs, but the school identify for that level of support. So most will provide some form of the Daily Mile, for example, but in different formats. Some will have different policies around the lunchrooms and things, and packed lunches. So it's just really working with schools on that individual basis to see what level of support they require from a more of a healthy weight perspective. So there's a real mixed bag, really. Some do it really well, some need some additional support, and some we're still trying to engage with.
Thank you. So yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Wahid?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your report, Kate. Can you just clarify overweight? So what's overweight and what's obese? And when you say like overweight and obese and then obese. So can you just yeah.
So that's to do with specific BMI that is identified through the measurement program at the school. So there's a number that comes out that's matched up against their weight and their height, and that's what we sort of use to identify targets in the town.
Councillor Malcolm?
So I suppose a bit similar to my question. I've got two questions, but the first one is a bit similar to the one before. What does contextualising the data show? So if you take into account the levels of poverty in Luton and the levels of ethnic variation as well, like, does that contextualise the data in a way that helps us to make sense of it? And I suppose you talked about the school profiles. Does doing that help to understand what's going on for schools and therefore what they maybe need to do in a bit more detail?
Yeah, so with the school profile, as Matt sort of said in the past, it's been quite a useful tool for them to see what's going on in the local area, and then they can devise action. So as you said, yeah, they'll kind of get that information, so what's going on around them. And then they could bring in perhaps some sort of policy. So healthy packed lunches was something that came out, was quite successful in the past, but it's just a way that we can sort of collect, reframe the obesity management is this collective effort across the town. And we also want to try to empower our schools in a way that they can, work with us in this area, because they're the ones who, with the children, talk the most of the time, and they're also the ones that have most insight into perhaps what could work and what might not work.
And sort of on the data front, when we contextualise and look at areas similar to Luton, similar demographics, similar challenges around poverty, etc., we perform similarly. So there's sort of an outlying group of local authorities, if you will, or boroughs, which operate kind of on the same level. So it's not overly a surprise that we do have this challenge in Luton, given the issues that we try and work against.
Just to add as well, sorry to jump in, we do, it's not included in this report, but we do also have a map, a heat map, where you can see where there's higher obesity levels in children and young people, and it is correlated with deprivation broadly. So the wards that we know are more deprived do tend to have higher childhood obesity.
So it's quite like, I don't know, I think I've not been on this committee for ages, but it's probably the report that's most like really need to do something about this, because, very soon 50% of year 6 children being obese is pretty, I mean, yes, we're not an outlier in terms of other places that are similar to us, but I guess a few questions around that. Is it high enough profile, do you think, in terms of, is it on school leaders' radar? Like, where does leadership need to come from if it's not? Like, how do we create, some impetus to try and make some change happen? And are there more, and then I suppose related to that, going to be some of the effective things, because the tier 2 program seems pretty dismal, like 430 children referred and only 3 families attending by the end. Like, that's not good. Like, are we doing some research to understand what happened there and why it's not effective? Is there like social prescription that could happen of other sorts that might be more effective? Like, I don't know, it seems like like I say, it's, making me think, please let's do something about this. And I guess the questions are how and what.
Yeah, I'll jump in and then I'll let Matt pick up. So we've had lots of conversations about this as well, around galvanising that urgency around some of this. So the task force is the first step around what are the issues, what do we know about it, what do stakeholders think, what are the challenges around those 3 areas. We have talked about having a bigger kind of conference workshop type event to try and do some collective problem solving and leadership around it as well. What was the other point I was going to make? Oh yeah, and the research bit. Funnily enough, we were just talking about this with the University of Bedfordshire around trying to understand why very few people are actually taking up the offer at the moment. There's lots of referrals and then they drop off. So we're hoping to do some qualitative research around that to help inform that, with fingers crossed.
Yeah, just to add on to the point Sally made there, it is a whole systems approach is required to this. There's no one sort of lead organisation really. There's needs to be actions from multiple sort of sectors to support this. Obviously, schools play a key role. They have good contact with children and families, but the key issue remains that parental engagement. Sort of Sally's kind of alluded to there with the University of Bedfordshire. We're hoping we can do more research into that to understand why parents aren't engaging, and it's stepped up more so post the pandemic, whether there's still an ongoing sort of hesitancy around engaging with some services, but pre-pandemic numbers were better for engagement with the tier 2 service, but predominantly post the pandemic we've seen, and it's not just Luton, it's a regional thing. There's lots of other people in public health that are having these discussions of whether the traditional, nice guidance tier 2 program is the right fit anymore for families, whether it fits into the reality of people's lives. That's something that we need to consider, and hopefully that research will support us in sort of understanding that better as we move forward with providing services. And just that we do offer children and young person social prescribing as well, which typically when there is engagement there provides really great outcomes for the young people that engage with that service, but there's still the real barriers, that parental engagement and trying to get parents on board. And within the context of things, we know the landscape is very challenging for families, so it is a challenge of how we can work as a system to make those changes. And we also have a task force on the BLMK level, so health are very much engaged in the conversation, how we can sort of improve services that are available to our young people, particularly those that are living with obesity currently, and how we can provide better support for them. So there's still a lot of learning to be had, and there's still more that we probably can do and try locally, but it is a worrying issue, and there is always more I think we can do with that. So really welcome your view in terms of this. Let's try and get to grips on something.
Yeah, I guess I just feel like deployment the local will really matter in terms of what works here. It might not work in other places potentially, and I guess my instinct would be to suggest, don't just have the one tier 2 program and try that alongside prescribing food vouchers for families if it's poverty, and alongside something else, alongside activities for children that are free to go to if they get if you try all the different types of things that we can think of, and I can see which things work, or maybe they need to be I don't know, it feels like a level of urgency around let's try a few different things and work out what's more effective in our local context, and perhaps for different types of schools and different circumstances as well. And then the time with the university in terms of trying to understand that and understand what's going on and why people are engaging and not seems very important as well. So it's really good work, and thank you for doing it. But I wonder whether, I don't know, I know you're very busy with lots of other things, but it strikes me as a really important thing.
It is
and
up there.
Galvanising primary school leaders around this, that's where we're talking about it. And actually, I wonder if it might be possible to galvanise primary school leaders around a course like this and really seek to make a big difference across Luton.
Yeah, it's really helpful comments, and it is up there on the priority, top priorities from a public health perspective. I think it's a helpful discussion because it chimes with some of our thinking, but it's helpful to sort of trigger that action a bit more. We can pick up what the next steps are on it outside of the meeting.
So it's a great point, on food vouchers and things, because we know we have low uptake of food vouchers in Luton. So, like I say, it's that system of all those, as you say, those different areas need to sort of galvanise in some way to make sure we're doing it. But there is lots of great pockets of work that take place, and actually at reception we tend to perform better in terms of being similar to the national average. It's generally when we get to year 6 with our 10 and 11-year-olds where the main challenge is, whether that's due to having a more transient and turbulent population at that point, possibly. But there's a lot of different factors factoring in. On Sally's point, it's very much high on the agenda. There is just no silver bullet at the moment. Everywhere's trying something different. There's different. So with tier 2, we're trying different variants. We provide and offer a universal service for schools where we actually engage with pupils directly, and we find that typically their knowledge around healthy eating and things is really good, but it's just the application of it, taking it that step further.
Thank you. Who's that? Dr. Mohammed Al-Ramahi.
Thank you, Chair. Really advancing the point on contextualizing the data. We know that Luton has a significant percentage of Black, Asian, minority ethnic students in Luton schools. I think it's somewhere in the 80s, and in fact it was presented to this group a while ago. My question really is more in relation to whether the impact of race and ethnicity on weight loss has been taken into account, and to what extent, because this is very important indeed for a town like Luton, for us to contextualize it and put solutions, as the former speaker mentioned, that are tailored to the town rather than just assuming a generic solution that would work in here. So I'm just really wondering to what extent this was taken into account when preparing these, program, and if there is any intervention measures that need to be taken into account to make it more efficient and effective. I didn't see really any percentages in terms of ethnicities, whether the way issues can be broken down into ethnicities. I think that would be helpful if this is to be taken into account in terms of future updates. And in relation to the area of the point related to the university, I'll be more than happy to connect with the colleagues and promote that discourse in terms of the research between the university and the team on particularly the relation between the ethnicity and weight loss. That is an area of priority for the local university, and I know that this is also a priority area for the council. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those comments. Certainly, ethnicity does impact, and the programs that we have do tailor themselves towards Luton, and we enable that through the commissioning processes that we have. That we enable them to tailor themselves and be hopefully more amenable to our diverse communities. However, so that struggle does remain, and it's not currently sort of one ethnicity that's struggling to engage. As you sort of alludes to in the report, it's across the board. There's just really low numbers of engagement with the service at the moment. Definitely the ethnicity something is a figure that we can look into for future reports. We've just recently received the enhanced data set from the National Child Measurement Programme, and we get that on an annual basis. However, it was paused over the pandemic period because school nurses couldn't do the weighing measuring in schools. But we'll be able to bring more detailed statistics to a future meeting if that would be useful. There'd be no problem doing that once we've done that analysis.
Thank you. Councillor Wahid, and then we have Councillor Miles.
Thank you, Chair. Matt, like childhood obesity is linked with poor psychological, emotional, low self-esteem, low confidence. Have you put any interventions, any plans to combat this?
So mainly from that perspective, we have the Child and Young Person Social Prescribing Service that we have, which looks to target more of those issues. So essentially trying to have the child or young person in the centre, and even though weight may be an issue, it's actually addressing the wider context of that. If bullying and self-esteem is an issue, it tries to look at those psychological therapies that can support them initially, and then move on to that. That's was originally piloted in Luton and has been commissioned by the ICB across BLMK now, and that's provided by Active Luton. So it's an area where we, like I say, we commission and provide that and have a lot of value within that. So we would like, potentially, if we could, to expand that further. I'm not sure if Sally would like to sort of come in any further on that point, but that's at the moment how we provide that. We are working with the ICB around strengthening the Tier 3 offer, which is more around multidisciplinary teams. So that psychological support for children and young people, which hasn't been quite clearly defined at this moment in time, but there's a big piece of work and options appraisal going on at the moment on how we can provide better services for children at that point where they need additional support.
Thank you. Councillor Moles.
I'd like to also mention at this point is at the moment we're going through huge financial difficulties within families, and poverty is a big cause of obesity in children. I was born up just after the war, and I can remember my mother feeding me on sweets because we couldn't afford proper food food, but not in the abundance that we can afford it today. And I was obese as a child, and I've often, when I've been in groups like women's groups, I've talked about the fact that childhood obesity 9 times out of 10 will lead to diabetes which I unfortunately developed at the age of 13. So there's a lot of huge issues out there at the moment with regard to finance and the quality of food people can afford. So I think you're going to have a pretty tough job in the next year or so. I don't know how schools are coping with it. I guess they possibly are very good at sorting out the types of food for the children, but it is going to be a difficult task.
Thank you for that comment. And again, going back to the subject of food is something we're obviously very conscious of and aware. So we currently have the 4-year food plan, and with Luton, so that's running to the end of the year, but our aspirations to that are looking to extend it into a wider food strategy, which will bring in all the different components across the borough of food-related activities, of which, of course, food poverty falls under that. And so when we're thinking about food poverty, as you said, it's also about the quality of the food that's made available. And there's, at the moment, the Food First programme in Luton, which is looking to sort of link together the different programmes and help promote access. So there's definitely lots of avenues that we want to explore that link into the obesity agenda. Thank you.
And just add to that, I think schools are very good at supporting their families as well. I think there are a number of schools in Luton that set up their own food banks, for example, and things, and ensure that children who maybe can't afford school meals are being fed, although it may be at cost to the school. But as you say, it's a really big challenge, and it's a big project for us to take on a food strategy for Luton and how that may look. But we've made some good starts, I think, from the Food First programme in Luton, which has started to bring together a load of different community groups and organisations which already provide opportunities for people to get at least a warm meal, which is has good nutritional content to it. But it's, as you say, generally those foods which are deemed as unhealthier or higher in calories and lower in nutrients tend to be the cheaper, easier options for a lot of our families. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Nothing in the room, nothing on the call. So the recommendation was to note the contents of the report and to note the formation of the London Children and Young People Obesity Task Force. I think we all agree to note that. No dissenting voices. So thank you for your report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so moving on to the next item of the agenda, which is agenda item 9, the Children's Services Improvement Plan, which is on pages 36 to 50 of your agenda. And that's with Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point to note, there is an error in the paper. The recommendation is to consider a draft plan. We didn't include the plan in this paper, so the recommendation is to note the report. And what we will do is the plan is to follow. The plan is close to being finished, and I'll come to that, what the reasoning for pulling it just as we go through the report. So what we're looking at today is just, I suppose it's looking at the progress that we've made in children's services with the improvement plan following the Ofsted inspection. And a little bit of context, back in January 2020, Ofsted came in and we were judged to be inadequate. So following a very intense period of improvement activity, where we were monitored very closely by Ofsted as part of that process that we undergo. And then we were also overseen independently by the Improvement Board, which was chaired independently. So we've come through very well. Ofsted undertook the standard inspection in July this year. and we were given a new judgment, and they were deemed to have seen substantial progress. So I'm happy to report that we're no longer inadequate. We requires improvement to be good. Now there's three strands to this. They look at three themes, and it's impact of leaders on social work practice. We were deemed to be good, which is a very positive thing. Experience and progress of children in need of help and protection. We were requires improvement to be good. And experience and progress of children in care and care leavers. Again, we requires improvement to be good. Now, overall, Ofsted did say that we had made significant progress since the last inspection, and very much in light, taking into account the impact that COVID-19 had on services and on a challenging budget environment. And they were very positive about the work that leaders and elected members had undertaken to ensure that we went on this journey to improvement. Now, Ofsted identified 5 areas at our most recent ILACs for us to continue to work on, and this is why we had requires improvement for 2 of those themes. So they wanted us to improve upon the quality and impact of supervision and management oversight, the stability of our workforce, the quality and analysis of assessments of children, the quality of evidence-based assessments undertaken to support effective placement matching, and the consistency of support and pathway plans for care leavers. We've attached a full copy of the Ofsted's letter in Appendix A. Following on from this, when I do forward the finalised report to yourselves, we do have to get it to Ofsted by the 12th of December. That's a standard response. We get a number of months to create this plan. And we are taking the plan to executive on the 5th. So I will get a copy of it to yourselves this week. So it will be with you for review. I should also wanted to note that since the last review group, we had our SEND inspection, and that went very well. It's very positive, but again, the current feedback on that is embargoed, and we will be able to fully publish on the 5th of December. And following that, we will come back to CSRG with a full report and what are the next steps and the outcome. Now, I did mention the improvement plan and why it is not here. We had an improvement clinic with some of our DFE advisor colleagues who came in and suggested that we needed to make some additional work to improve and strengthen the plan. So we have done that, and it's just going through its final checks before we can share it with members. So I do apologise for that error. Feedback from our DFE colleagues, they wanted to ensure that we continue to have a strong commitment to children, young people, building on the Child-Friendly Town and 2040 programmes. They wanted to ensure we had shared critical weaknesses and actions to address these are clear, and we have made these clear in the plan. We wanted to ensure that they wanted to ensure that we were aligning our vision with the corporate and departmental plans, and we have done this in our revised improvement plan. Continue to evidence performance improvement and maintain the trajectory that we had previously, which again we've outlined in the new plan. Continue to be a learning department, sharing an understanding of strengths, weaknesses and priorities, and redefining our directorate improvement plan, as I've said, to evidence moving away from intervention and normalising the activity and innovation. So our proposal is obviously to feedback on this report because we haven't submitted the actual improvement plan to you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Malcolm?
Yeah, I guess first, unfortunate that we can't see even a draft of your response, because that would have been really, we could have actually given you some feedback there. I did have a question around, so I think having kind of got through the inspection is really good. We're out of that kind of phase now, and I do think the child-friendly town stuff, which we will have coming back to us, I think, at some point in the nearish future, is really important for kind of providing like a narrative about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I guess I would just, because that would be my instinct, I suppose, around some of the stuff around practice is there's good practice, but it's not always consistently good practice. And there was a comment around sometimes, workers go and see the children that they're responsible for, perhaps at home, perhaps at school, but it's not always clear why they've gone, and it's not clear that there's creative practice. And actually, I think a unifying thread of Luton 2040, and we want young people to be secure across these 5 areas. So of course I'm going to go and actually write it up as one of these 5 areas that I've got and like frame the work that I've done with them around. But I think actually maybe there are other things that you're doing in response to that particular criticism, and there were a few others, but I don't know, maybe a little bit more on the outline of what the letter's going to say in response, or kind of what the areas of work are going to be, or any specific responses to what I just said.
If you give me 1 minute, I'll just pull up. I can give you a little bit more detail on sort of the outline of the letter.
Yeah, I mean, I think 2 things, thank you. I think, first of all, really important is for us to share the letter formally here, and to, and I guess reviewing that, this transition between my sort of self and Amanda, is that we've written our recommendation to consider and comment on the draft improvement plan, but it also is to consider and comment really on the letter and the outcome of the letter rather than the improvement plan, because we haven't included the improvement plan because it's going through that final development stage. So I can assure you that you've seen the improvement plan previously on several occasions, and I think what we're really, the next step of this is to know where in the letter we need to put our priority. So if we look at the Appendix A on the letter, the quality, what needs to improve is the quality and impact of supervision and management oversight, the stability of the workforce, the quality and analysis of assessments of children, and the quality of evidence-based assessments undertaken to support effective placement matching, and the consistency of support and pathway plans. So there are 5 very specific areas for us to continue to improve on. What we wanted to do with the improvement plan is not to just focus on those 5 areas, but then to widen out in terms of that continued improvement, because we couldn't stop doing everything that we've been doing to get to requires improvement and good in leadership. So it's not just us coming back and saying this is what we're going to do for the quality and impact of supervision and management oversight. And for those 5 areas, our next steps are absolute detailed technical work, I suppose. So for instance, the quality and impact of supervision and management oversight will go back around, because we've always been focusing on that. So it will go back around in terms of, do we have the model right? Are we auditing and asking the right questions to see what impacts that having on children, and what do we mean by that model? In terms of the stability of the workforce, it may be that going forward, Chair, that you want to have a report on the forward work plan, specifically on the stability of the workforce. And I think that's probably quite useful for you to ask us in terms of what are we doing about the stability? How are we doing that transformation work through our workforce board and our academy, social work academy? And how are we reducing the number of agency staff and increasing permanent staff? So that, I think, would be something that you would want to look at and carry on asking questions about. The quality and the analysis of assessments of children. Again, we're looking specifically at our practice model. Going forward, as we think about the forward work plan, we can ask the principal social worker, Sancha Thomas, to provide a social work report here, looking at the three practice issues here, which is specifically around assessments, the supervision, management and oversight, and the pathway plans and support. Because in that way, you can then pull together questions around practice and what does that mean and what does it look like. So those areas we are dropping into our overarching Children's Services Improvement Plan, and that also we will share with you. Outside of this meeting going forward. It's quite a large document. Because it does include all of our work, and it will include our 2040 child-friendly town, etc. Because we don't want to have lots of different plans. We want one plan that informs all the work that we're doing all the way through. So we can come back and have a detailed conversation specifically about the plan. But I think the two things we probably should have framed, first of all, here's the letter. Let's talk through the letter. It's a great achievement for Luton to have achieved in that time frame of 2 years, including a global pandemic, to have come out, including the budget changes, the cuts, etc., to have come out of intervention in that 2-year window, and to actually then be moving on to requires improvement. And that leadership, and when you see leadership is good, that's all of us and all of you. So it's all of us in terms of how does we make the difference, and it requires members' support and members' investment and members' scrutiny as much as it requires officers. So I think that's a great achievement, but we can't rest on our laurels. So quite a lot of work for us, I think, Chair, to forward plan in terms of the questions that you want to ask, and lots of opportunities for this group members to spend more time, putting more scrutiny and looking at those specific areas that you'd like to ask questions on, or you'd like to have back here with the different officers come in to deliver. And Paul's very central to that as the improvement lead. So hopefully that kind of gives you a bit of context to that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Keynes.
You've just said what I said some time ago, that it's all of us have got to get this sorted. The Ofsted letter isn't really good, is it? It hasn't cleared everything. There's an awful lot there which really says, if you don't get on with it, we're going to take other action. I think this committee should take more notice of what's going on. I also think that the portfolio holder should take a very, very quick and energetic look at what's going on. The past one was not, and he allowed everything to drift. And yeah, I quite agree with you. And I would ask that this committee, Mr. Chair, sends a note to the portfolio holder and tell them to watch it. Well, not in those terms, but.
Yeah, maybe I could come back. I mean, so for your reassurance, we are working very closely with our lead member, and she is very much involved in overseeing and developing the report. And I do have weekly meetings with the member to go through the scrutiny. So she does, for your reassurance, she does scrutinise very much so and hold us to account. She also is part of the Children's Improvement Board. So did you want to say something?
I just wanted to add to the reassurance in terms of the lead member. For example, today we were actually together with the chief exec looking at a particular case. That's how much she's involved in the work that we are doing.
An audit.
The audit. Yeah,
it's an audit process, not just looking at cases.
Mm. So we looked at that audit process using a case but that links in, of course, to the work here around assessment of children, supervision of the cases. So that, you know, she is very much in touch with the work that we are doing.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And then your other comment, sorry, Councillor King, your other comment was, I mean, it's hard, isn't it, with an external inspectorate? You know that they're going to give you recommendations for improvement. That's their role. So, and we're not sitting back on our laurels and thinking that, you know, services are good. I mean, what their judgment is we require improvement to be good. So we're very clear about that. But we're no longer inadequate. And so for us, the most important thing is that our children do not receive an inadequate service, that they are safeguarded, and we prioritising them getting the very best service that we can provide. So, and I've had the experience of working in a service that was judged to be outstanding as a senior manager. That doesn't mean to say that all services at all time are outstanding equally. It doesn't mean to say that all services at all time are inadequate. So you have to take a balanced approach to all practice and look at how do we, and as you say, how do we make sure that we're constantly checking that our services are providing the right level of service at the right time. So it's not sitting back on your laurels, no matter what your judgment is, because actually that judgment is one moment in time. You constantly have to keep your improvement journey going, and that's the need for quite a comprehensive improvement plan, because the improvement plan drives forward the service delivery plans, and it drives forward the team plans, which drives forward the actual practice. And then we measure the practice to see how that's going. And that includes, most importantly, the voice of the child, the voice of the family. How did you experience our intervention? How did you experience your support? So we're not resting on our laurels. We are with your support, absolutely, working towards, you know, we would dearly love to have that judgment of good. Absolutely. But the most important thing is that our children and families feel that our service is good. So our individuals, as they receive the service, they think that was good, it was helpful, it was supportive. So hopefully that gives you some assurance.
All I can say is I've got more confidence in the present portfolio holder than I had in the last. And I still think that it would be useful if this committee backed her up slightly. And,
Councillor Keating, could you clarify what you were asking for in relation to the reference, just for the...
I don't really know. Basically, a backing to the portfolio holder and ask, be polite about it, but saying, can she watch very closely the procedure? I'm sure you can put it in a better term than that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in this process of improvement, scrutiny is essential, and it is slightly disappointing that we're not going to get to review this plan before it goes to executive and gets sent out. But we will receive that copies of that on the 5th of December. Yeah.
No, I will share that with you this week.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yes,
cool.
I've got just some final bits to finish off on one of the appendices, and then I will happily share it with you.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Malcolm?
This kind of responds to what you were saying, but also moves into the territory of the next item in terms of planning. But I think you were suggesting, you know, a fairly frequent, a fairly regular report on. It's what you would do as governors of a school. Like if you had an Ofsted inspection, you have a report every time on where are we going with these 5 key areas that have been highlighted to us. So maybe it wouldn't be every Children's Scrutiny Review Group meeting, but a fairly regular update on, okay, the relevant officers leading on these items, coming and reporting on like how are we doing, what does success look like in a year's time, in 2 years' time, and how are we doing in our journey towards moving towards that. And I guess I wonder whether, tying up with Councillor Keen's point, whether, so I think it would be more regular than annual. So I think that would probably happen, you know, every quarter or maybe even more regularly than that. I don't know what your specialty.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite happy for us to provide at every scrutiny and over a brief overview report from improvement to look in general at the improvement report, because that's how often that we're doing that. So that wouldn't be difficult for us to do, and it would give scrutiny a kind of a heads up in terms of where we're at, but also any of those exceptions that we're noticing. And then if you want that kind of deep dive, you can timetable that going forward for more specific issues that you're noticing as we're noticing them. So we can become that proactive with because those reports are being provided. So we have that information. We're doing that level of monitoring. We're doing that level of oversight. So it's not for us if that, I think that might work in terms of how you really kind of drill into or demonstrate your role as a scrutiny of our service. I suppose it's easier to then focus on that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, sorry. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'd be completely supportive of adding that as a standing item in each meeting to review against those 5 key areas. Sorry, Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, so I think regular, but then like a deeper dive with a particular view to like where do we need to be in a year? Where do we need like, and keeping that standard and like making sure we're actually making progress to those things. But then I wonder whether if we do a deeper dive on an annual basis, we invite whoever the portfolio holder is moving forwards, because it might well change year by year, like actually like in the spirit of like working together, because we're all part of the system that is the good leadership and governance of this, and actually in the spirit of like working together, like what alongside a deep dive, what have you been looking at with officers, lead member for Children's Services? What do you want us to be particularly attuned to as the committee over the next year? Maybe we'll talk and we could talk to them every year. And like, I wonder whether putting something like that in place as like the method of governance of the Ofsted stuff could be really helpful and like just shows good leadership and governance again.
Yeah, I'm happy for us. I think that's a really good suggestion, Chair and Councillor Malcolm. I think you know, Paul and Teresa can work something up in terms of how we sort of propose that going forward also. So there are a number of key reports that we need to make sure that are scheduled in here that are sort of subject, will be detailed into the improvement plan. And we also have a framework of performance and accountability, which we'll use to kind of bring into how we share that with you. So we just need to make sure when we look at the forward plan that we've got those key annual reports that come through Children's Services timetabled in the agenda, and then some of those other key activities. You also might want to consider, just outside of almost kind of this sort of formal process of children's scrutiny, to look at, do you create an informal kind of conversation where you might invite officers in to talk about a specific area, or you might want to do a visit. So, you know, there's other ways, isn't there, of kind of moving out scrutiny just from a formal process. There are settings that, like meeting with our care leavers, for instance, as part of the forward work plan from scrutiny to understand where, how they're receiving services. How is it going? How do they feel? There's also our Children in Care Council. We have, our families, we have children, we have officers from a work perspective. So there are different opportunities to create a informal conversation with, but really being sort of forward thinking is part of your scrutiny. So it's still part of your scrutiny role, but how do you create some opportunities for different conversations over the year? So, there's just different spaces that you might want to, we might want to plan together just to try some different approaches.
Can I just, sorry. Yeah. Can I just say, that's great. That's good. When we suggested, about 2 years ago, that we asked the kids and others to get involved, and what do they want? It was poo-pooed by certain people, and it never did take place. But that's good. Yeah, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? No, I'm just looking around. Nothing on the screen. Okay. Thank you. So, in relation to that item, so yeah, so the recommendation was updated just to note the report, and I think the report is duly noted. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. So moving on to, I think it's the final item of the agenda, which is, you know, we've discussed it to a degree already, but the draft work programme, pages 51 to 60 in your agenda pack. So as discussed, I mean, I think I completely agree with the discussions we had earlier that it'd be good to add a review of those 5 key areas as a standing item, and I understand that previously it was a standing item, but then it became bi-monthly for some reason. So yeah, absolutely. Few updates. I think the Children and Young People Mental Health Action Plan and Strategy Report, and the the CAMS update have both been combined into one item, and that's going to be covered in our February meeting. Otherwise, it's as shown on the pages that you have on pages 52 to 53. Any comments? Councillor Malcolm? Councillor Malcolm, yeah.
Just wondering whether you think it would be useful to bring the passenger transport stuff to this committee, or whether that's got plenty of governance elsewhere.
It's a very good question, actually. It's due at executive as a proposal, isn't it, for the 5th of December. I don't have a problem with bringing it here. I mean, we can bring through an update. Maybe that's the best way forward, to bring through a update on the passenger transport changes, and maybe we could schedule that into February, March. So if depending on approval or guidance from the executive report, then we could bring a further update of the service in general in March. Do you think that works?
Yeah. I guess it's whether it's helpful to have input from like a scrutiny committee in terms of like progressing that decision making and like development of a new service or a slightly different service.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think it's a good suggestion, and I think you would want oversight of that in terms of significant kind of change impact potential, and it will be part of in terms of our improvement plan. It will be part of our ongoing projects of improvement. It'll be one of our improvements, so we can schedule it either into the update reporting, or we can have a specific item which might be much more useful to have a look in March, to have that time of real sort of more scrutiny about what the proposals are. That gives time for development if that works for the forward plan.
Yeah, I mean, we can include that in the forward plan. We don't actually have a meeting in March because of the elections, so we'll probably have to put it in a forward plan for one of the meetings after the elections, I think, for those of us who might still be here.
Right, just another one. I'm not sure whether we're focused on just children's services or whether it, like the broader remit of Luton 2040 and child-friendly town stuff is appropriate. But if it is, then the play streets policy that's going into exec on the 16th of January from the health team would be the kind of thing that I would assume, you know, perhaps with a view to taking a keener interest in Luton being a child-friendly town, we maybe want to be informed about that, having the opportunity to input on it before it goes to executive. Like,
Yeah.
that feels important to me.
It does. It is important.
I think our next meeting is before the 16th, so we'd be able to actually make any recommendations if we had any to the exec. Am I right in that? Yeah.
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
I'm agreeing with that. So yeah, we can do that briefing prior. And I do think in general that overarching 2040 and child-friendly town, it is important, isn't it? Because it's the framework for everything for us to be able to kind of have those conversations here. And I think you as members will want to reach across, not necessarily just into children's services, but it may be that you, for instance, want to look in, depending on all of the election processes, etc., but on housing and the impact of, for instance, you know, kind of our, for instance, our care leavers and what's the impact on, you know, their opportunities, etc., and outcome of their housing. It may also be that you want to specifically look at the, you know, families, etc. So it's not literally always just about looking into children's services. It's the impact, isn't it, and the experience for children and families, which is why we, you know, we talk about play and sport and obesity and health. So yes, there I think it's, as we develop going forward, those kind of future plannings of those conversations are most helpful, I think, for you to have that overall overarching view.
Councillor Keynes, do you have something or no? Okay. Thank you. Anything else under this item? No. Great. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I think that concludes our business today. Let me just check. Yep. So